Greetings, friends. Today, we will discuss with you the situation in Ukraine as of the 26th of October 2025. A large number of very important events occurred today. So, let's proceed. And we will begin with Moscow. Probably the most significant news is arriving from the capital of the Russian Federation today. Today, the Supreme Commander-in-Chief of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, visited one of the command posts of the Joint Grouping of Forces and held a meeting with the Chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, and the commanders of the groupings involved in the zone of the special military operation. The president was thoroughly briefed on the situation along the line of contact, specifically on the Kupyansk and Krasnoarmeysk axes. It was noted that up to 5,000 servicemen of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, AFU, are currently encircled on the Kupyansk axis, and 5,500 AFU servicemen are encircled on the Krasnoarmeysk axis. The Supreme Commander-in-Chief was provided with complete information regarding the state of affairs at the front. In fact, this is the most crucial situation, the most crucial information that was published early this morning. Let us dwell in more detail on Kupyansk and Pokrovsk to understand if this encirclement is genuine, and we will begin with the Kupyansk sector of the front. This is how the maps look today, the 26th of October 2025. Perhaps most cartographers have plus or minus some individual blocks, districts, and so on and so forth. But generally, the picture is approximately the same for everyone. And if we calculate the distance between the populated area of Kupyansk, or rather, the positions of the Russian army in this sector, which were claimed by at least some expert, and the positions of the Russian Federation in the area of the populated area of Kolesnikovka, then in this case, the distance between these 2 points is 14 kilometers and approximately 480 meters, that is, plus or minus in one direction or the other. And, of course, when talking about this distance, it is very difficult to imagine the encirclement of the Kupyansk grouping. Perhaps the maps do not correspond to reality. Perhaps the Russian Federation and the Chief of the General Staff, when speaking of encirclement, have slightly different concepts and mean a slightly different situation by these words than what we are used to seeing, for example, in the battles for the populated area of Mariupol. Well, let's stop for a more detailed look. And for an understanding of the encirclement of the Kupyansk agglomeration, it is necessary to increase the number of updates, let's say, since October 25th. And now the picture will become much clearer. We will start with a geolocated video in the area of the populated area of Osinovo. Let's start with this video. And here we can observe how, in the course of reconnaissance activities, the position and equipment of the armed forces of Ukraine are detected, which are immediately destroyed by a Russian Federation UAV. But the fact itself and the footage of the destruction of this vehicle are not key. The key are the frames that follow immediately after. In these frames, we see this destroyed vehicle, and we see a second Russian UAV. This is the key moment. Note that one vehicle is destroyed, and a second UAV of the Russian Federation immediately appears in the sky. That is, this immediately indicates, first and foremost, that hundreds of UAVs might already be hidden in this sector, just waiting for the moment when another AFU vehicle appears to destroy it. Slightly to the northeast are more frames, again, from the area of the populated area of Osinovo. Here we see a similar situation. An AFU vehicle is destroyed upon detection by a Russian UAV, and again, the key moment is the frames that follow. A second UAV immediately appears in the sky, which, firstly, confirms the contact, confirms, so to speak, the strike, and continues its duty over this sector. And I am confident that if another vehicle had appeared now, it would have been immediately destroyed, and a Russian UAV would have appeared in the sky again. This, most likely, is what Valery Gerasimov was talking about when he mentioned a complete encirclement. Slightly further north, in the area of another crossing, in the vicinity of Kupyansk-Uzlovoy, we see Ukrainian units attempting to break out of the encirclement. However, they are also struck using UAVs. That is, the crossings are absolutely non-functional, and at the present moment, an attempt to reach a crossing is equivalent, most likely, to playing Russian roulette. Another situation right now is from the territory of the town of Kupyansk-Uzlovoy. A vehicle was most likely trying to break out towards the crossings, but was also destroyed. If we are talking, of course, about such control, about the operation of Russian UAVs along the entire Oskol River, then, of course, yes, this is a complete encirclement. Perhaps Ukrainian soldiers can cross the Oskol River, but only without equipment, without tanks, without IFVs, without combat vehicles, without anything. Just with their personal weapons, perhaps with briefcases, with backpacks, and AFU units cannot carry anything more out of the territory of the Kupyansk agglomeration. It is also worth noting that control over this crossing, over this river, is not the only measure being currently carried out by Russian units. Today, the most important footage from the past day is also arriving from the territory of the populated area of Kurilovka. Here is the video material. And here we can observe two Russian soldiers standing on the roof of a building and holding the Russian tricolor in their hands. This building has been geolocated. It is at this point, on the roof of this building, that Russian soldiers raise the tricolor. And based on these frames, we conclude that Ukrainian units are beginning to retreat from the line of combat contact, from the front line, striving to get as close as possible to the town of Kupyansk-Uzlovoy to exit the encirclement in time and break out of this pocket. This is how the map looked yesterday, the 25th of October 2025. Today, the map already looks like this. That is, we see that Russian units, besides having complete control over the Oskol River, are also trying to cut this axis into two sectors. Most likely, Russian units will wedge in all the way to the populated area of Kupyansk-Uzlovoy. In the event that Russian troops manage to reach this part, clear it, and generally wedge into the entire Kupyansk axis, then from that moment, the AFU grouping of forces, numbering 5,000, will be divided into two smaller pockets. One will be located in the northern part between the populated areas of Kucherivka, Kupyansk, Podoli, Petropavlivka, and also a southern pocket, which will include such populated areas as Kovsharovka, Nova Osinova, Glushkovka, and so on and so forth. And, of course, subsequently, the Russian army will attempt to deal with each separate pocket individually. Overall, it seems that this pocket has indeed already been created here. And also today, certain reliable experts began to publish information that after the publication of the report and this event, the meeting between Putin and the chief of the general staff, Syrskyi issued an order to retreat from the Kupyansk axis. Perhaps in the near future, in a day, 2, or a week, we will completely color in the Kupyansk pocket in favor of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. But again, the information about the retreat has not yet been confirmed by more reliable and official sources. Also, during this meeting, information was received that the AFU garrison had also been encircled in the territory of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. In this case, we are talking about 5,500 soldiers. But if we talk about the Pokrovsk-Mirnorod agglomeration, the situation here is much more transparent and clear. The fact is that the distance here is only 5 kilometers, let's say 800 meters. That is, much less than at Kupyansk. Virtually almost 3 times shorter is this corridor. Moreover, this corridor, so to speak, in the Pokrovsk agglomeration, runs mainly through open terrain, through open ground, as it is customary to call it. That is, it is practically impossible to break through this corridor. It is already marked on the map with a gray-black zone, because UAVs control everything here. In the Kupyansk sector, of course, yes, there is a barrier in the form of the Oskol River, but there are a large number of forested areas, and generally, individual groups, individual infantry units, might be able to slip through them. If we talk about Pokrovsk, such a possibility is definitely and unequivocally non-existent here. Once again, 5,500 have been encircled. And as you can see, we recently discussed information that the commanders of the armed forces of the Russian Federation presented an ultimatum to the Pokrovsk grouping to leave the town and the Pokrovsk agglomeration by Monday, the 27th of October 2025. However, we see that Ukrainian formations did not take advantage of this opportunity. Now, there is no possibility, no chance, to break out of the encirclement. Russian units are constantly pressing along the perimeters, tying down Ukrainian units and preventing retreat. Moreover, important footage is arriving today from the territory of the populated area of Rodinsky. In these frames, we see 2 Russian soldiers raising the storm banner, and the banner is being raised in the eastern, let's say, eastern part of the town of Rodinsky. We do not adjust anything based on these frames, because these territories were already adjusted in favor of the armed forces of the Russian Federation based on previous geolocations and video materials. But in any case, these frames are very important today, as they also confirm confident control over this territory. This is what the map in Rodinsky looks like today. And I remind you that yesterday, individual sources, individual cartographers, reported that Rodinsky had been completely cleared. Here, for example, is the situation on October 24th, the situation on October 25th, and here is the situation on October 26th. That is, there was already information about a complete clearing, and we thought that perhaps today, after the report and the meeting of the President of the Russian Federation, the Ministry of Defense would also confirm this information, but it was not confirmed today. Perhaps it will be confirmed tomorrow, or the day after tomorrow, perhaps even in a week, because, as President Putin said again at this meeting, in the near future, in these days, the Ukrainian side will undertake attempts to deblock the AFU grouping in the Pokrovsk agglomeration, the territory of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. And, apparently, this deblocking operation has already begun. Perhaps for this reason, the Ministry of Defense is not rushing to declare Rodinska under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Footage was published today from the territory of the populated area of Suketska, and in these frames, we see the work of the 82nd Air Assault Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine as they climb onto a building and raise the Ukrainian flag on the southern part at the southernmost point of the populated area. That is, based on these frames, we make the corresponding adjustment. This is how the territory around Suketska looked yesterday. Today, based on objective control footage, the coloring in is being done. That is, we see that a deblocking operation is underway. Footage is also arriving today from the territory of the populated area of Volyn, another wave of counterstrikes, a counteroffensive. Here we see direct and close quarters combat, close contact between Russian units and Ukrainian assault forces. These episodes occurred somewhere in this area, and based on these frames, we also make an adjustment. That is, these strikes, these video materials, primarily confirm the words of the President of the Russian Federation, that the Ukrainian side will counterattack to deblock the Ukrainian units in the territory of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. But there is one small nuance here. The fact is that Russian troops are currently on the defensive, in protection. They have been dug in since August 2025, although perhaps not in, say, reinforced concrete shelters, but in any case, the positions are much more advantageous for Russian units than the positions from which Ukrainian units are currently counterattacking. The operation to deblock the 5,500 soldiers in the territory of the Pokrovsk agglomeration is costing the Ukrainian side a very high price, and it is not a fact that this operation will end successfully. In any case, we are observing that, in addition to attempts to counterattack, Russian units are trying to improve their positions. Information is being received today that the Russian army has managed to secure positions in the northwestern part of the populated area of Shakov. In these frames, we see assault troops moving from building to building, and these structures are being hit by artillery strikes. That is, Shakove today is also falling into a small encirclement, perhaps a small pocket. And if the Russian army manages to straighten the front line, say, including Shakov, approximately along the given red line, then no counterstrikes executed by the AFU in the Dobropilya area will have any significance, because this bridgehead, Rodinske Shakov, will be an insurmountable wall for the units of the armed forces of Ukraine, and it will definitely be impossible to deblock anyone or anything there anymore. 10,500 soldiers, according to the report, have been encircled. This is Pokrovsk, this is Mirnorod, this is Kupyansk. This is a large number of units, and the loss of such a number of fighters could even lead to unpredictable consequences for the entire command of the armed forces of Ukraine, and for Syrskyi personally. Also, information is being received today that during the report in Moscow, it was announced that Russia has successfully tested the Burevestnik missile complex with a nuclear power unit. This is a unique product that no one in the world has. The decisive tests have now been completed, stated Vladimir Putin while visiting one of the command posts of the joint grouping of forces. The test of the Burevestnik took place on October 21st. The missile covered 14,000 kilometers. And this is not the limit. The technical characteristics of the Burevestnik allow it to be used with guaranteed accuracy against highly protected targets at any distance, reported the Chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, to the President. To understand what the Burevestnik is and how the Russian Federation can use it, we can provide a visual example, say, in the territory of the Atlantic Ocean. The Burevestnik can fly over this territory for tens of hours, for example, without crossing the airspace of a particular state. The Burevestnik can fly 14,000, 20,000 kilometers. It can remain in flight for tens of hours and simply wait for its moment. We must understand that such a system, which is already flying near the borders of NATO states, reduces the time from, say, decision-making to a strike to a matter of minutes, seconds, which will definitely not be enough for those states to apply any countermeasures. And from this point, the Burevestnik missile can fly immediately, for example, towards European countries, or it can change its course. It is a cruise missile and fly towards the United States of America. These arrows are all added to the map conditionally. This is what the Burevestnik missile is capable of. And this Burevestnik missile for the Russian Federation is primarily not so much a weapon of deterrence as, most likely, a guarantee of security, and a guarantee that, apparently, the hostilities in Ukraine will continue until some logical solution. Well, we will of course monitor the reaction of Western countries. We should definitely expect some interesting statements from both US President Donald Trump and European leaders. This will be very interesting. But for now, let's return to the territory of Ukraine and continue to discuss the situation along the front line. And we will continue with the Zaporizhia sector. Today, the armed forces of the Russian Federation have again managed to improve their positions in the area of the Uspanivka fortified area. I remind you that the first footage from the territory of the populated area of Yehorivka arrived just yesterday. Russian units are taking the populated area of Vishnev into a semi-encirclement, cutting it off from supply, and today, information is already being received about the advance of Russian units towards Rybnov, towards the populated area of Krasnohirska, as well as towards the populated area of Privilm, located on the, let's say, Russian side of the Yanchul River. Hostilities here, in this sector, will definitely begin in the near future. Next, we move to the Novopavlivka sector. Today, the most important footage comes to us from the territory of Novomykolaivka. In these frames, we see Russian units controlling a strongpoint called Butterfly. This strongpoint is under the control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. It was a powerful, fortified area, and its capture and clearing now opens the way for the Russian army further to the southwest, towards Novopavlivka. The only obstacle, the barrier to such strikes in the past, was this Butterfly fortified area. Now there are no such obstacles. I remind you that Russian troops are currently developing an offensive from the direction of Ivanivka, and, apparently, the battles for Novopavlivka will acquire an intense nature in the coming weeks. We have discussed the situation in Pokrovsk. As for Kostiantinivka, there is no news. And let's also pay attention to the situation in the area of Lyman and Siversk. I remind you that the first video materials confirming the presence of Russian saboteurs in the town of Lyman were published yesterday. Today, this information is also being confirmed by various cartographers. This is how the map looked back on the 24th of October 2025. Today, the map acquires colorations, according to which Russian units are already approaching the minimum distance to the town of Lyman. Hostilities are, apparently, expected any minute now, perhaps even any day now. Information is also being received about the improvement of positions of Russian units in the territory of Dronivka. After clearing this populated area, the Russian army is gradually advancing further in the southwestern direction, with the goal of outflanking Siversk from the northwest and reaching the rear of the AFU grouping on this axis. Information is also being received about the improvement of positions in the area of the populated area of Novoselivka. Ukrainian sources are publishing footage of strikes on the positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in this sector. Based on these frames, we also make a small adjustment. We see that we have reached a certain turning point in the 2025 campaign. There are still 2 months of hostilities ahead. And, apparently, during these 2 months, we will receive a lot of different news. And that's all, dear friends. The Military Summary FC channel reminds you that we condemn all violence in the world and call for immediate negotiations and the resolution of all problems through diplomacy. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and all the best to you.